À-bas-le-ciel.
But we had here 1.42 million US dollars. They spent this to create a seemingly independent charity to issue them with a license to kill. That's what it is. They really are, in effect, shills of Whole Foods. They're representing a corporate interest, and the bottom line is they're raising the value of those products. They're raising the value of that pork, beef, eggs, milk. Ultimately, this is a sticker, this is a label, this is a controlled brand name and a logo that raises the value of the final product. This is just not legitimate lobbying.
Fuck the police coming straight from the underground. Young nigga got it back cause I'm brown and not the other color, so some police think they got the authority to kill a minority.
Okay guys, I'm going to talk a little bit about veganism. Hope that doesn't freak anybody out. Maybe some of you are just here to watch the videos about A Song of Ice and Fire. Maybe some of you are just here to hear me complain about my personal life, about my love life, or about learning Chinese, or about Buddhist philosophy. We've had a lot of different topics on this channel lately, and we've had some discussion of eating disorders. We've had a lot of diversity in the content. But to talk about veganism for a change, I'm just going to read you a few paragraphs of this article, and then you'll see why I'm reading it. This is from an article on humanewatch.org. Meetmian Park. She's a former vice president for farm animal welfare at the Humane Society of the United States. In 2009, Park's resume landed her a job as executive director of the Global Animal Partnership, GAP, the organization administering a new 5-tier animal welfare rating system recently unveiled by Whole Foods Market. To judge from glowing reports of the new meat, dairy, and egg labeling scheme, Meetmian Park sits at the nexus of the animal welfare mainstream and America's foodie elites. But Park and GAP aren't exactly what they seem. GAP is beginning to show signs of a legitimate vegan takeover led by Park, who, as the farm animal vice president at Humane Society of the United States, was crystal clear about her desire to eliminate as much livestock farming as she could. So, look, this article, hilariously, is from the year 2011. At that time, there was still some optimism, apparently, about this fundamentally welfarist move to label foods at Whole Foods. Whole Foods is the name of a chain of grocery stores in the United States. And since then, this has been thoroughly discredited, I think not just in the eyes of vegans, I think in the eyes of all kinds of normal consumers too. Now, who actually pays for an institution like this to exist? GAP. This article doesn't get into all of the breakdown of their finances, but it says, for example, in 2009, Whole Foods added another $100,000 to its support for GAP, bringing the total to $1.42 million US dollars. So I do not know how many years that's spread over, but 1.42 million US dollars donated from Whole Foods to this charitable agency. And this agency is supposedly existing. I mean, the non-vegan standard term here is, do you have the fox watching the chickens? This kind of thing. Who watches the watchman? Who is the policeman? And who is the criminal in this situation? Who is investigating who? Who is holding who to a higher standard? So apparently the funding for this started in 2005 when Whole Foods was the only donor putting in more than 1.32 million US dollars into this organization. And one of the crucial people was a former corporate affairs consultant for PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, named Stephen Gross. Right? So this is we're talking about here the tiny number of people who basically live as financial parasites on the vegan movement. And from an abolitionist perspective, they earn their money by selling out the principles of the movement to the highest corporate bidders who want to see the greenwashing of their industries. They want a label put on what the industry is doing that makes it seem ecologically responsible, that makes it seem more morally acceptable, I guess more enticing to consumers, and ultimately that raises the value of their product, that raises the ticket price of their product, right? An organic free-range egg is simply worth more money than a factory-farmed egg if it's blatantly advertised as such, right? So at the end of the day, there is also a very simple question of financial value to this.
Fuck that shit, cause I ain't the one. Punk motherfucker with a badge and a gun to be beaten on or thrown in jail. We can go toe to toe in the middle of a cell.
When I was here in China back in the year 2008, I met a young woman, a very peculiar, memorable character actually in many ways, this young woman. And she had, for years and years, been trying to volunteer in this kind of humanitarian sector, in the organic agriculture subset, but the charitable, take off the scarf I guess, in the charities linked to making the transition to organic agriculture. And in the end, she was really crestfallen and heartbroken because she found that here in China what was going on was a 100% corrupt game of different companies arranging to put these labels on foods and basically, brokering and bargaining and negotiating the deals for how international agencies would license out these, in effect, brand names, these labels that variously rendered a product fair trade or ecologically sound by some definition or ethical by some definition. So this is a very peculiar demimonde that involves a very small number of people. And so as mentioned here, many of the people in this particular group, the GAP group, the Global Animal Partnership Group, they're veterans of other similar jobs. They've come from people with the ethical treatment of animals. The woman who's being featured here, Meetmian Park, she is the only animal activist to have worked for the Humane Society of the United States, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and also the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM. Okay? She also spent 10 years as president of Compassion Over Killing, COK, a Washington, D.C. animal liberation group, where she also worked with Paul Shapiro and John Balk. So a small number of people who can afford rent in Washington, D.C. move around musical chairs between a small number of jobs. And it mentions that when these people were younger, they tended to be involved with more edgy and sometimes illegal groups, such as the ALF, the Animal Liberation Front, and then kind of step by step, they move into the mold of these kind of quasi-corporate roles, frankly, selling out veganism to the highest bidder, as I've said. Now, it's not all bad. It's funny. I mean, in a sense, I can say I believe in lobbying. But by the same token, I look at these types of organizations and I do not think they are legitimate lobbying. Okay? This is really using a broad brushstroke, but I can say that People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, Humane Society of the United States, and GAP, which was new to me, I learned about them today. I read about them just a few hours ago. The Global Animal Project, GAP. I do not regard them as legitimate lobbying organizations. Now, what is legitimate lobbying? Okay, I'll give you an example from my own direct memory. I remember one day I went to City Hall, and there was a very passionate speech at City Hall from a straight-up policy hack, from a straight-up shill, if you want to use the word shill, from a totally cynical, he might as well have been an actor in a play. This guy got up at the microphone at City Hall, and before he got up on the microphone, the actual elected officials at City Hall, so, the councilmen or councilwomen or, the representatives of the people, were sitting there and debating how much they should pay the cleaning staff. It's a real question. It's a real political question. They were sitting there and debating how much should the janitors at City Hall get paid, and whether it should conform to this standard or that standard, what have you. And then this guy who actually brought with him a claque, he brought with him an audience. He brought with him a group of people, again, completely cynical, completely theatrical. He brought with him a group of people just to applaud and cheer his speech. This guy got up at the microphone and gave this very well-rehearsed, eloquent, and well-performed denunciation of all the elected officials at City Hall, saying that they were missing the point, and that the question of how much they should pay janitors and cleaning staff should not be based on City Hall trying to get the lowest wages possible for these people, of trying to beat down the working man to getting the lowest wages possible. That should instead take into consideration giving these people a decent quality of life in the city of Toronto, taking into account, for example, the cost of rent that these people had to pay, or the cost of transport to get to a neighborhood where they could afford rent given the low wages. Beautiful. Beautiful. 100% cynical, 100% corrupt politics. But it's beautiful. That's real democracy. It's cynical and it's corrupt, but that is real lobbying. This guy is somehow being paid by the union of these cleaners, these janitors, these low-level workers at City Hall, to come and give them a voice. That's legit lobbying. Okay? And I can say I believe in it in the same way that I believe in dentistry. It doesn't mean it's a good thing, doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I think this is a really legitimate function within a democratic society, right? And at least the same extent vegans need dentists, we need lobbyists. We need people who can stand up at City Hall, at provincial parliament, at the state legislature, at the national parliament, at the national senate, and in that way, whether or not cynically, give voice to our interests as a special interest group, right? And all kinds of people in society have that. The problem is when I look at this sort of thing, you get the fallacy of instrumentalization. So what? Apparently, Whole Foods, this for-profit company, spent about $1.5 million US. I don't know the total budget. This is only covering a couple of years. This is only up to 2011. Since then, I assume it now exceeds $1.5 million US, but I don't have the exact figures. But we had here $1.42 million US up to 2011. They spent this to create a seemingly independent charity to issue them with a license to kill. That's what it is. A 5-tier animal welfare rating system for selling such products as beef and poultry and pork and eggs and milk, right? On 5 different tiers of how humane those products are. Now, already you have, you can't even say conflict of interest. This is just not legitimate lobbying. Unlike the example I just used, which I describe as cynical, unlike this guy who stood up at City Hall and gave a voice to the voiceless, gave a voice to the janitors, to the cleaning staff, these people are not giving a voice to us. They're not giving a voice to me or you or the other vegans. They're not. They're giving a voice to their donors. They really are, in effect, shills of Whole Foods. They're representing a corporate interest. And the bottom line is they're raising the value of those products. They're raising the value of that pork, beef, eggs, milk, as I've already described, 10 minutes ago in this video. Ultimately, this is a sticker, this is a label, this is a controlled brand name and a logo that raises the value of the final product in the same way that made in France. The French government has a very, very tight labeling system for that, for the specific province in France where a product is made. If you have wine that is called champagne, it has to be actually made in the Champagne region of France. All that stuff is controlled, and it raises the value, raises the price of your product to have a proper official labeling. So that's the kind of scheme this is.
Rather see me in the pen than me and Lorenzo rolling in the benzo. Beat up police out of shape, and when I'm finished, bring me yellow tape to tape off the scene of the slaughter. Still getting swole off of bread and water. I don't know if they fags or what. Such a nigga down and grabbing his nuts, but on the other hand, without a gun, they got none, but don't let it be a black and a white one. 'Cause girls will throw you down to the street top. Black police showing out for the white cop.
Now, there's one sense in which we can't complain, and there's one sense in which we can. The sense in which we can't complain is we aren't paying them, right? We didn't give them the $1.5 million. Sorry, exactly $1.42 million. But I assume it continued to increase after 2011. In a sense, we can't blame them. There is more than $1 million US sitting there on a desk when this scenario was created in the first place by corporate interests, by corporate donors, the outstanding donor being Whole Foods. I don't know. I could get the other numbers, see what other corporations donated. Apparently some other companies did donate some money. I don't know. I don't know who. Okay. So there's more than $1 million sitting there on a desk in Washington, D.C. saying, who's going to take it? Who's going to step up? You know? And now honestly, I mean, Meetmian Park, I don't know how much her salary was. We probably could look it up. If they're a real registered nonprofit in the United States system, probably we can find out exactly how much money she made per year. But maybe she made $100,000 a year for 5 years. Maybe she only made $70,000 for 5 years. I don't know. But life is expensive in Washington, D.C. You got to get a good salary to do this kind of job in Washington, D.C. All these other people who stepped up and said, me too, who said, I want the money that's on that table, who said they want this job and they want this role, it's very clear what the dynamics are. Now, unlike a legitimate political party, unlike the Green Party or the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, it's not the case that I can complain, hey, I gave you my vote, I gave you my donation, you're supposed to work for me, you're supposed to represent my interest. There's merely, the appearance, there's merely the illusion that these people represent veganism or represent the animals or represent ecology or represent some higher ideal, and they don't. They represent a special interest group. The problem is it's the wrong special interest group. It's not us. It's not me. It's not you. It's not YouTube. So my point in this video is I can understand that some people imagine that because I have a diploma in political science, because I understand lobbying, that when I talk about lobbying government, I'm talking about becoming this kind of figure within the vegan movement, like Meetmian Park, like the GAP, the Global Animal Partnership, or like PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and the role they've played. And from my perspective, absolutely nothing could be further from the truth. This is not what I want to do. This is not something I'm willing to do. And in part just because I'm Canadian, even if I wanted to sell out, I never could. I could never do this in Washington, D.C. And believe me, in Canada, there wouldn't be $1 million on the table. There wouldn't even be $10,000 on the table. This kind of money in politics just does not exist in Canada. Not for this kind of tiny special interest. So even if I wanted to sell out, I couldn't. Because I'm Canadian and the whole game is smaller and less money in Canada. But this is not what I'm talking about. This is not what I want. I can say that I absolutely would be interested in, cynically or not, standing up and giving voice to the voiceless in the same way that I just described that labor union representative standing up and giving a voice to the cleaning staff at City Hall, right? And, at that time, many of the cleaning staff at City Hall were Portuguese speaking, as it happens. Maybe that's changed. Maybe now they're Korean. I mean, I have no clue. The ethnic diversity within Toronto was immense. But I remember in the old days, we had a lot of Portuguese people doing those kinds of jobs in downtown Toronto and at City Hall, at my university, and I'm sure over time that's changed. But anyway, there's a reason why there's somebody who's a professional, well-spoken representative who does that, and you don't just choose someone who may be a poor, uneducated immigrant from Brazil or from Portugal itself, I don't know, coming on the microphone and arguing with the government. There's a reason why there's a specialized job for that. And we had a great example that's come up in passing in my conversations with Mod Vegan, which is this business of standing up and giving a voice to vegan interests in the education system. Because the education system is massively biased by donors from the meat and dairy industry, food processing companies, just food companies, just like Kraft, just companies that want to market food to children, to form their consumer behaviors, their patterns of consumption, patterns of diet for a lifetime. There's money in it for them. They have a very clear interest, apart from the fact that they want to normalize what goes on at slaughterhouses and all the rest of it, right? And I've seen some of the most ridiculous examples. I remember seeing in Australia. In Australia, their meat and dairy industry got organized to have this kind of traveling exhibition to show children how wonderful it was that cows get exploited to produce milk. But in most countries, this is going on all the time at the school level. Somebody needs to stand up and be that voice. No matter how boring or unrewarding the political process is, someone needs to stand up at 100 different, parent-teachers association meetings, at 100 different, educational council meetings. Wherever you live, the name for this may be different. But I mean, in every parliamentary system, there's a different name for the democratic arm of government education policy. There's some kind of council, there's some kind of city hall-like meeting where the ministers of education hear complaints from the public, and they do hear the voices of special interest groups. And I've seen some examples of that where, like the Hindu community comes to those meetings and says, look, we feel we're misunderstood. We need education in Canada to explain to children who Hindus are, because there are a lot of bad stereotypes about us. Or the Jewish community sends someone and says, look, we have a lot of problems with anti-Semitism. We need, the public education system to address these misconceptions about our community. All kinds of special interest groups get to say their piece and try to influence what actually gets taught to children. And, some of those have been very successful. Obviously, the battles over sexual education are some of the most extreme. Should children be taught how to use a condom or what a condom is or not? Those get debated in the mainstream press. But for every one issue like that gets into the mainstream press, trust me, there are a million other issues that are much less interesting, much less controversial, that get debated in those public meetings with the Board of Education. Or where you live, it may not be called a Board of Education, but there is some kind of semi-democratic arm of government. Vegans need a voice there. Vegans need real advocates and real advocacy. And that form of advocacy will never be subsidized by Whole Foods markets or any of these corporations. Whole Foods is not going to give $1.5 million to have a guy like me stand in front of the Board of Education and passionately explain to them why a children's book showing a happy cow on a farm being exploited to produce milk is not okay, why this crosses the line, why we, however many hundred of us there are in Canada, are going to stand up and fight like hell to get this book taken off of the shelves of, our schools, to get these pamphlets, to get this propaganda taken out. Because this is, in a terrible way, influencing the next generation, right? This is partly a cynical marketing ploy to get children to, drink milk, to buy meat, etc. It's partly normalizing and glossing over the unspeakable brutality of where milk actually comes from, where eggs actually comes from, etc., right? And there's a very obvious, industry lobby on the one side of that debate, and there is no lobby on the other side. Right? We haven't had the Catholic Church going to school board meetings to debate those things with those industries in the same way that the Catholic Church really did go to debate the status of homosexuals, in our public education system. The way the Catholic Church really did debate whether or not children should be told what a condom is or what birth control is. Those debates had more than one side represented. So, I don't know, for the past 150 years or something, there's only been a weight in one side of that balance. And vegans desperately need advocates, desperately need lobbyists in all of those completely unglamorous political forums, giving voice to the voiceless. And yes, partly when I say giving voice to the voiceless, I mean my fellow vegans. But partly, I of course mean the uncountable millions of animals that are living their whole lives on a concrete floor, under a steel roof, in a shed, in cages, living and dying to produce food that is unhealthy and unnecessary for an uncaring public of human beings who couldn't care less if their diet kills animals, couldn't care less if their diet kills themselves, and couldn't care less if this, frankly, leads to the end of the world in terms of ecological devastation. Somebody's got to bring that message to all these public forums. And I don't mean once. I mean 100 times. I mean 1,000 times.
Ice Cube will swarm on any motherfucker in a blue uniform. Just 'cause I'm from the CPT. Bump police are afraid of me. Young nigga on a warpath. And when I'm finished, it'll be a bloodbath of cops dying in LA. Yo, Dre, I got something to say, yo. Fuck the police. Fuck the police. Fuck the police.
And that, my friends, is the difference between real political lobbying and what I see when I look at People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals and this alphabet soup of other, I don't know, more or less cynical ploys to get corporate money to create labeling schemes to try to whitewash, or if you like, greenwash the mass manufacture of animal products industry. Hit me up.